Good afternoon, everybody. Anup Wadhwa. I'll be moderating today's webinar. This will be conducted more like a panel discussion. We have a very eminent panel of speakers. I'll be introducing the panel to you, and I'll be guiding the whole session through a series of question answers. And at the end, we will have a question answer round. In between, we will also be conducting various polls. So we are starting off with a good number, and I am sure that in the next 5-10 minutes, many more will join. Welcome once again. The Automation Industry Association and the IIT Foundation for Smart Manufacturing have co-created this. We will be doing a series of webinars. Today is the inaugural session. And as we go through the period of lockdown, and many of you may want to actually get into the startup mode, we'll continue this exercise trying to bring to you whatever help, whatever support we all need from each other. Without further ado, let me also introduce you to the panelists. Can I have the, yes. So we have Mr. Vijay Paranjape. Mr. Vijay Paranjape is a leading doyen in the automation and electrical industry. He retired from Siemens as a director and member of the managing board. Currently, he is an independent director, and he brings a very vast experience from the global perspective, which he will be sharing with us today. Welcome, Mr. Paranjape.
Thank you.
Can we, yeah. We also have Mr. Dilip Sawhney. Mr. Dilip Sawhney is the managing director of Rockwell Automation, one of the leading automation companies, and also now a leading player in Industry 4.0. He too will be bringing his perspective, not only from the India viewpoint, but also from the global experience. Welcome, Mr. Dilip Sawhney.
Thank you, Anup. Looking forward.
We will be joined by Mr. Nandakumar. I was told he was in a meeting with the bankers. Have you finished that meeting, Mr. Nandakumar?
Yes,
okay, welcome. Good these days, we don't have to travel from one meeting to another. You just need to switch URL. So Mr. Nandakumar is, I find myself at a loss of words to introduce him. He started as an entrepreneur. He still very much is in an entrepreneurial mode, except over the last several years, he has become one of the thought leaders for India's policy. He's on the member of various committees, notably as far as automation is concerned. He's been our past president of the Automation Association, as Mr. Paranjape as well as Mr. Dilip Sawhney have been our former past presidents. But Mr. Nandakumar has also been very much in the instrumentation and environment aspects of industry. He is on various government bodies. Earlier, he was with the Small and Medium Council of Maharashtra. Currently, he's an active member of the Capital Goods Skill Council, a very respected and renowned figure from the chemical process engineering. Pleasure to have you, Mr. Nandakumar.
Thank you, Anup.
Our next speaker is Mr. Sivaram. He's our immediate past president, and he is a fellow batchmate of mine from IIT, but not from Delhi, from Madras. He has been again in the electrical and automation field throughout his career, and his most significant achievement was to found B&R Industrial Automation way back in 1996. And in a period of about 2 decades, he's brought them into the leading forefront of automation players in India. Very recently, in February, he retired from there. and he is now actively involved in people development and as a mentor with the Samarth Udyog program. You will hear more about Samarth Udyog from some of my other panelists. Welcome, Mr. Sivaram.
Thank you, Anup. It's a pleasure to be here.
And now I bring you to our current president, Mr. Ravi Agarwal. Mr. Ravi Agarwal is currently also the managing director for Pepperell and Fuchs Factory Automation and looking after businesses in Middle East and India. And he has been a very active ideator as well as a director for execution at our IITD-AIA-FSM Foundation for Smart Manufacturing. You will be hearing him in his role both as an automation expert as well as some of his thought processes on Samarth Udyog. Mr. Agarwal has earlier worked with ABB, another global giant in the field of automation, and he also has links with IIT Delhi, as many of us do. Welcome, Mr. Ravi Agarwal. Good to have you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Anup ji.
My next speaker is Dr. Sunil Jha. I find it difficult to introduce him as a person from academia because having worked with him over the last 3 years, I have no doubt he would have been equally successful if he had been with us in industry. He is a PhD in manufacturing science from IIT Kanpur, but now he is leading a lot of initiatives with IIT Delhi as a senior professor in the mechanical engineering department. He brings in a lot of multi-dimensional approach from the realm of computer sciences, simulation to material science, as well as kinematics, and obviously in Industry 4.0, which he has launched with us as a co-director of the IITD-AIA Foundation. Dr. Jha would also be talking about some of the activities we are trying to do for the entire industry, not so much directly in your plants, but for you to come and prepare yourself. More about that you'll hear from him. Dr. Jha, welcome to this first seminar and looking forward to having you again and again.
Yeah, good afternoon all and welcome to join you in this seminar. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now with this, I will start the panel discussion in earnest, and I'm going to call upon the first speaker, which is Mr. Vijay Paranjape. So, yeah, Mr. Paranjape, you know, most of the speakers are from the automation field, but for you, I have a slightly different question to launch this webinar. I also understand most of our attendees are in some way or the other involved in setting up the restart operations post-COVID. So before I get into the main question, maybe the audience could use the button for Q&A just to indicate if they have already applied for permission to restart. Mr. Paranjape, with what mindset should the restart really happen?
Thanks, Anup, for the introduction. I hope I am audible.
Yes, yes.
Okay. First and foremost, after an event of this cataclysmic proportions, the restart has to start with a positive mind, because it is going to be the mindset which is exuded by the leader that is going to be taken by the employees as well as accepted by the customers. You know, Corona and its impact has only proved that this is possibly the culmination of VUCA, volatile, is certainly it is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Now, I would also say that Corona is nothing but Swachh Bharat rolled across the globe. The first and foremost that teaching from COVID-19, as the disease is called, and Corona, the virus that causes this disease, is decontamination, sanitation, social distancing, touch-free. In fact, it is the touch-free which got the attention very fast when everybody started doing namaste instead of shaking hands. At the same time, the necessity to have cleanliness has been underlined and re-emphasized by COVID-19. And this is where the organizations will have to put their first emphasis as to what is their calendar, how are they going to go about decontamination of their premises, how are they going to ensure sanitation on a continual basis, how are they going to maintain social distancing. In fact, I was not able to get a slide, but I heard that in one of the Chinese automotive manufacturing companies, which has recently started operations, even in a canteen, there are individual chairs or benches which have been provided, and the person or the people are maintaining a distance of 6 feet, sitting on that particular stool. It's not even a bench, it's a stool, and having their lunch. So this is the kind of implementation. We know that the Chinese are fast in doing everything, whether it is a spread of virus or containing the virus. So this is the kind of discipline that is happening now. This is a picture of the old style crowded assembly lines. They have already become old style, although the pictures are not old. This is certainly not going to work for the simple reason you don't see, although in some cases you do see some personal protection equipment, but certainly not social distancing. And certainly, I don't think the decontamination part is implemented. And this is where you see that even on an automotive engine line, some social distancing has been achieved, although whether it is adequate or not, only time will tell that particular organization. On the second, there is a right-hand side picture. You find that there is a distance of 6 feet, so also on the line at the bottom. So these are going to be the prerequisites, the norms for any manufacturer to restart operations. How it gets implemented will depend finally on the individual situation. What I would urge is that for whatever that is done, whether it is decontamination, sanitation, social distancing, please have standard operating procedures so that the repeatability is ensured, and not only for the certification purposes, but to ensure repeatability, because these things are going to stay. We cannot do away with them. In fact, another thing that COVID-19 has shown is it is highly socialistic and democratic. It doesn't honor any hierarchy. If even the president of a company or a country breaches any rules or regulations, he or she is going to get affected. And same thing is going to hold true even in a company. I know of instances that these have happened mainly in India, because we are a hierarchical society, that even if there is a clean room and a board has been put that please keep your shoes outside, even if you want to, somebody will tell you, nahi saab chalega, aap andar aa jaiye. So the corona doesn't understand chalega. If you breach a rule, you are likely to get affected. And this is where your systems and procedures will have to be strictly followed. You are going to bring in men and material. How are you going to ensure that the men who come are sanitized and decontaminated? How are you going to ensure that they stay decontaminated and sanitized while they are working? because they will also need to go to various areas, and you have to ensure that the areas, including the toilets, will have to be absolutely maintained clean. How are you going to track? This tracing and tracking is going to be now a norm. I would even go to the extent of saying that this decontamination and sanitation will have to come to FDA standards or something similar to what you see in food and beverages industry or in pharma. This is the kind of cleanliness that will be required to ensure that we do not get affected by COVID-19. I can go on talking about surveillance, the control. You will have to have systems and the equipment in place to ensure that the material that is coming in is decontaminated, that you do the surveillance, and all this data is captured real time. So this is where many times the Indian industry lacks. We do not have the ways and means of capturing the real time data. But this is going to be absolutely essential. So please concentrate on the processes followed for a movement of men, a movement of material, in and out, decontamination and sanitation. I would right now stop at this and would like to hand over to Anup for putting up questions.
Thank you, Mr. Paranjape. This is Ravi Agarwal, intervening on behalf of Mr. Wadhwa. In fact, thank you for outlining the immediate needs as far as our in situ manufacturing is concerned. And this is, I believe, very, very essential in order to move forward. That brings us to an immediate question as to how a company, maybe from the attendees, is prepared to ensure long-lasting continuity. As Mr. Paranjape has indicated, I would request Mr. Jha, Dr. Jha, to kindly introduce that poll. If I'll request the attendees to kindly join us in giving your opinion and polling. Thank you for your responses. Still coming in. Pretty interesting. In fact, thank you. I guess quite a few people have already polled. Maybe Dr. Jha, we can at least share the results as the polling comes to close. Dr. Jha, can we share the results to the attendees, please?
Yeah, shared with everyone.
Wonderful. So 49%, 50% now say that they have safety protocol for co-manufacturing and related operations, 53 votes. 23% have said we have holistic plan for sustainability, but are yet to start. That means if I add together, nearly 70 to 75% of our attendees representing the manufacturing domain are somewhat prepared or either have a detailed plan and safety protocol. 27% still need guidance, and I'm sure we and along with us, the larger advisory would be in a position to take that up. I would request Anup ji to kindly take over the forum.
Yeah. Thanks, Ravi. So very interesting poll, and I think it's also generated some audience interaction. I'm now going to move the discussion towards a little bit of people orientation and ask Mr. Sivaram to respond to this next question. Mr. Sivaram, we are all facing the challenge of permission to start, but start with reduced staff. What really are the available options to integrate the work for home staff with those who will actually be there in the plants? What is the kind of a mismatch? And what do you do if experts aren't around and some mishaps take place? And we all know this situation is going to last much longer than we hope for. Over to you, Mr. Sivaram.
Thank you, Anup. Hello, everybody. This definitely is a very intriguing question and possibly running through the minds of all of us, if not only for ourselves, also for the various services and goods that we obtain as a company and as an individual, right? So how are our supply chains going to cope up, and how are we going to cope up with that? I have a few thoughts on this, and I will put them out, not in a very detailed technical manner. What I mean is that I'm not going to explain the devices which are going to come into play, but I will tell you what, in my opinion, should be in place. Okay. First thing is that the demand is not going to go up in a step from 0 to 100. Demand will ramp up in stages. Production also can only ramp up in stages, because the ramp up, the size of the steps, will depend not only on market demand, will also depend on our supply chain, will depend on how the logistics gears itself up over the for coming days and weeks, and will depend on the skilled workforce availability. Another point which you have to clearly remember is that the production procedures will have to be different, because if I call this going to become a new normal, because we will never go back to the BC, the before Corona. That era is gone. The new era production process will be different, because social distancing and hygiene requirements will become an integral part of our day-to-day behavior. It is not just that we are going to practice them for some time and then go back to business as usual. The shop floors will also be sparsely populated for quite some time. One, because of the, let us say, restrictions on movements of people, because of availability of the people who have moved away to their whatever hometowns or something else, but also because of regulations from the authorities who may not allow 100% attendance. Okay. Now the question is, what are the different phases? Because from day one, the organization will have to go through, first of all, what I call it as a kickstart phase. The kickstart may last the initial 2 weeks or 3 weeks, because after a long shutdown, if you have had a shutdown, then starting up a machine is in itself a task which normally is done by very experienced people. Now, these experienced people may be available, may not be available on day one. And even if they are available to us, they may not be able to be present on the shop floor. Third challenge which you have to think about, but for which we have to only somehow manage, is the commissioning spares and consumables for the initial run. Apart from, of course, reactivating the authorities, the utilities like power supply, whatnot, right? So this will. So in all this now, what it means is that even before we start up, even during the kickstart phase, we have to start training our workers to work with and cooperate with remote specialists. And what do we train them for? We train them for clear communication, to use precise terminology, attentive listening, because when somebody is talking from a remote, you have to be very attentive in listening and practice active questioning. So if something is not clear, you question it out and make it clear for yourself. You should practice peripheral vision, that while you are listening to the specialist from his home or whatever, that you are also keeping an eye on what's happening on the machine. And you must also practice some amount of thinking along and maybe even thinking ahead, right? So this is a first and foremost training activity that we have to bear in mind. Okay. And now, once the kickstart is done and the machines are ready to roll and hum and create material, the trial production is done. Now a stepwise ramp up has to be planned. Now this plan has to come from the management, because taking into consideration the givens, that is capacity of the supply chain, capacity of the delivery chain, logistics, warehousing, but also a very important factor is that no matter at what percentage of the full scale volume we are producing, we would like to be at every stage actually profitable. We do not want to, because it's a low volume production, make unbearable losses, right? So at every planned step of the production volume, you have to design, bear in mind the layout of the machines. Which machines will you operate? Which machines you will idle? So that the social distancing and other factors are taken care. Now, fine, it is good to plan the machines, but what are the work skills that are needed to operate these machines? This is where that matrix which we just now saw, can we perhaps have it back, that slide? The skills are to be mapped against people. Which operators are there with which skills? So we have a capability matrix. Now this has to be seen through a filter of which of these workers are available today. And then you have to put another filter on it, saying what is the production volume today and how many people of each skill set do I need here. And yet there is one more factor, that is how many of these people must be present on the shop floor in that shift and how many can be remote. So this is a kind of a 3 or 4 layers of filters which you have to overlay on each other to get that true picture of what is possible and how to make it possible. Now, the availability of people is once again on a day-to-day, it's a little fluctuating, because even if the workforce is available, once in a while people may have to drop out, because leaving aside the standard conditions of leave and whatever, but also maybe because of some medical reasons, or that they perhaps fail at the screening test at the entry to the factory. This can also happen. Right? So this is the people availability. Then if there are people working locally and people working remotely, how will they communicate with each other? In the initial stage, suppose you don't have such sophisticated mechanisms in your factory today, which is very well understandable, right? Then what is the tool which you can give at an immediate measure and at a low cost, which is also within the capability of the people to use? In the beginning, of course, we have the ubiquitous phone, hand phone, the smartphone, with which you can do video calling, you can do screen sharing, maybe you can do a VNC, and you can immediately start establishing a two-way communication between the local worker and remote worker. These things are not very convenient, but at least they are a saving measure. You could, given some more time, you can go on proceeding to sophisticated measures, perhaps even tools like AR glasses or even HoloSense or something. But this will depend very much on the size of the organization, the capacity and the need to use such sophisticated devices.
Mr.
One
Sivaram,
more comment. Yeah.
just a sec. If I could request you to, deal with this when we come around next, because Mr. Sawhney is also going to touch a little bit on the work from home, and then I would like you
Yeah.
to capture the rest of the stuff a little later in the discussion. Is that okay right now?
Yeah, okay. I mean, because we also have a time constraint, right? So I will just go through the technology aids which we want to plan for in the first phase. One of the very important things is the thing to sanitize. You have to sanitize not just the worker when he comes and cleaning your hands, but also all the operator panels. And now if you want to clean the operator panels, you have to make sure that they are all IP65 compliant so that you can do a thorough cleaning. For moving the people around within the factory, you can have very low cost Bluetooth devices, because if the worker who is doing it regularly is not available today and another person has to go, we should not waste the time that he tries to look for the particular machine or the particular component. And the skill matrix, what we have seen, can be done with a very simple tool like an Excel also. We don't need a very sophisticated one. But it can also be quite sophisticated, integrating into the ERP as well, so that later on the performance monitoring can also be taken care of. So I think I will stop right here, but I will just mention one particular thing. The management has to have a view that not in the first month, not in the third month, but where am I going to take this organization in the digital way in the long run? Because digital is inevitable, and all that work which we put in, even if crude and simple in the beginning, should actually form part of the pattern to take us to that final point of having a totally digital factory. Right? So I think I will stop here and give it back to
I'll come back to you, because after your next remarks, we would also engage the audience with a poll question. So I'll come back to you a little later.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah. Now, so we've now heard a lot about the fundamental aspects of implementing social distancing. We've also talked a little bit about how we can prepare workers to pitch in from remote. Let me draw the attention to one other aspect, which is very directly related to the supply chain. And I'm going to ask this question from Mr. Ravi Agarwal. Mr. Agarwal, everyone is looking at technology as part of the bounce back being effective. And would you recommend a priority area that pays for itself in the short term, as well as creates a strength for future?
Thank you, Anup ji. Once again, good afternoon to everybody. As we do this panel discussion in the shadow of COVID, a moment of our prayer and good wishes go to all the Corona warriors who are actually fighting on our behalf for the disease, against the disease for the humankind. To continue, I would say both as a panelist and also handling affairs of our company, we too are into the domain of manufacturing. The questions that are directly coming in different forums and within our own organization as well, the key question, of course, remains finance. But if I park the key question aside for a moment, the next biggest question is supply chain. And when I talk of supply chain, essentially people are not looking at the chain, but the material. And when I say the material, whereas all manufacturing enterprises, the key parameter of movement, control, monitoring, visibility is actually the material in its different conditions. So I would rather divide, not call it supply chain, but permit me to use the word material movement. I would divide it into three categories. inbound material, on the shop material, and outbound material or the finished goods. When I look at it and compare it to how different countries and enterprises and working environment is there, within our manufacturing, purchase and supply cycles, the amount of time and resources we spend on planning, expediting, assuring, double assuring, chasing goods is phenomenal and a huge leak in the system. Leak in terms of efforts and resources, not to talk about wastage energy. So these are all indirect costs, but they bear a lot, and these are in fact shackles in our own feet of manufacturing. I'll now attach these two aspects. Post-COVID, a lot of anxiety remains among material, the reprioritization of material. For once, I'll take example of automotive industry, which has long ago had a very keen focus on material movement, Kanban, just in time, whatever. In fact, 50% of Indian manufacturing hovers around automotive, I'm told. And if you look at keenly how automotive operates as efficiently as it has of late been doing, is controlling the movement of material. And now I bring in the automation aspect. Those of you who have been suppliers to automotive industry and alike, few years ago, automotive industry decided that all goods, inbound, outbound, 2D, 1D barcodes, including all kinds of genealogy and track and trace, should happen. So automotive industry actually forced its immediate suppliers to put 2D barcodes, thereby bringing on transparency, bringing on a good deal of analytical capability and prioritization ability to the assembly plants. I stress on that. Whereas the tier 2 and tier 3, the same barcoding principles for material movement as imbibed into their own footprint of manufacturing, their own operations, has been left wanted, largely speaking, the exceptions aside. And that's how now I'll marry these two, that the anxiety around material post-COVID, as the supply chains material movements are completely blocked, partial automation or a simple low-cost barcoding solutions, if thought of and implemented in short term, thereby also establishing some long-term basis, are one of the key criteria. And believe me, quite a few analyses done in tier 2 companies have shown that the leakages and wastages associated with non-transparent material movement, rejections and all, are actually many times over the cost of automation to bring in transparency to material movement. So, material inbound scheduling, its quality control, outbound scheduling depending on the demands of the distributor, how the basics work. And most importantly, if you look at the line supervisors who are all the time struggling as to what kind of raw material availability exists and marrying it to the work orders has been the key bane. So I would say post-COVID is a very good opportunity, and looking at the anxiety of the entire manufacturing domain, material movement being made transparent and eased up by minimal automation to start with is one of the key factors that must be handled, because this expense might be the bitter medicine, but in my limited opinion, it cures many ills affecting our manufacturing arena. I mean, just to speak of that, we have case examples where the speed of inbound material turnaround, the reliability, wrong supply of material, wrong inventory counts, reduction of wastage, in-house inventory calculation, track and trace, our own inventory system, first in, first out. I mean, the major big enterprises have the wherewithal to do it. It's essential to them. But the bottom of the pyramid, the foundation of the Indian manufacturing, small, medium enterprises, ancillaries, tier 2 and 3 are still into it. And I think this opportunity, though sounding bad, should be a catalyst in patching that up, bridging that gap, coming out of that ill. And just to touch upon that, if there exists, and there should exist, a blueprint of digitization in every enterprise of all sizes, not saying digitization of an enterprise is only a big ticket thing. I'm guessing more of my colleagues will throw more light on that. But digitization, information transparency as applied to material handling in all three domains, inbound, outbound, and on the shop floor, is a very, very essential and keenly needed prescription. Over to you, Anupji.
Great, thanks. I'm going to now engage the audience. I know there have been questions which have been coming in. We'll deal with that. But Dr. Jha, can we conduct the poll number 3 now? Yes. So we've touched upon various topics, and now is the time for audience to respond. Which is your most critical need post startup for a smooth operation? We have about a minute for this. Yes, so if everybody can start. Just make sure you're answering your most critical need. Yeah, we have about 100 people already fired in their responses. So if anybody is left, please do that in the next 20-30 seconds. We are going to close the poll and then share the results and take the discussion forward. Okay, I guess we will be now closing this poll and announcing the results. Can we show the results? Great. So this is very interesting. Majority of people, nearly 2/3, are talking about automation of inbound, outbound, as well as connected machines. And a little bit on the quality control and inspection. with very little being left out of this. So I guess there may not be too many people in the audience currently looking for robots to take over. But if there are any of you, I would rather that you give us a hint. This was not part of the poll, but if you have a definite need for cobot or robot, please mention that in your response on the chat window. Now I am going to move to the topic which we had Mr. Sivaram speak about, which was how do you engage workers from home? And to present another perspective, I have Mr. Dilip Sawhney. Mr. Sawhney, your company is known not only for hardware but also for software and integration. There has been a lot of innovation on the software side, and many companies are offering free subscriptions till the lockdown continues, many till December. Is this really a blessing? Is it easy for people? And how do you see the response of companies to implement new technologies, learning about it from home?
Sure. Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much, Anup. It's been a great discussion so far, and I'll try and share, my perspective. It's actually another dimension to the point of view that Mr. Sivaram was sharing. So first and foremost, COVID is undoubtedly a generational event. Our lives will never be the same again, and it also applies equally well to manufacturing. We've already heard, as you try and think of social distancing, it does not mix naturally with manufacturing as we've practiced it up until now, right? Mr. Sivaram spoke about the fact that you won't be able to get the kind of manpower that you used to have to run your plants with, right? Be it the operating staff or the support or the maintenance, right? So, technology has a huge role to play. I think, it's, something like COVID, no doubt it's a headwind, but all the same, it's happening now as many in the industry have already been, to varying degrees, adapting and adopting, technologies like Industry 4.0. So digital technologies are clearly coming to the rescue, undoubtedly, right? Working virtually and collaborating remotely, these concepts are absolutely here to stay. And I'll submit to you that this concept will continue, right? As I've been talking to many amongst, the audience today, customers across the country, it's come to my notice how people have been using virtual technologies to carry out FATs, factory acceptance tests, in a virtual manner, right? Because they want to utilize this downtime, right? So I'm going to be basically sharing with you two examples, which are very simple, yet very, very compelling in terms of how technology is helping us bridge this gap. The first use case here is basically about collaborative remote assistance, right? Lockdown is here to stay, right? And even after the lockdown is lifted, you will have very, very sparse, very low level of resourcing, low meaning not as in capability-wise low, but the number of people who will be available would be low. And oftentimes the domain expertise that is needed on the shop floor may not necessarily be available, right? And I think one thing which is becoming immediately quite relevant is the use of, appropriate, light, augmented reality equipped technologies, which can allow people who are on site, in situ with the equipment or machines, collaborate in real time and virtually with people who are domain experts who may be either working from home or maybe, available in a different city altogether, right? And what it simply does is simple devices, right? Like iPhones, iPads, Android devices, what have you, right? As long as they're camera equipped and equipped with, piece of software, such as an example being Before Your Chalk. This is the technology that our company has, right? Anyhow, what it allows you to do is to ensure that both the person on site and the remote expert are taking a look at the same field of view. And then they can actually engage in terms of collaborating with each other through pinpointing the actions and the instructions that need to be executed, right? And what it allows you to do is ensuring that you are actually eliminating some unsafe situations that could have been created, or at a minimum, avoiding some unnecessary wrong operations, right? And Anup, as you take me to the next chart, right, which lists out a much more wider variety of use cases of similar technologies, it just illustrates or underscores the point that you could have someone, let's say the persona is that of an operator, who can very easily collaborate in real time with people within his own organization who may be available remotely, such as, say, someone from the maintenance team, or equally easily collaborate with a supplier's field service engineer or even a design engineer, right? Because the technology is basically, vendor agnostic, right? And these use cases are compelling. They're being used. And just in the space of the last few weeks, there have been thousands of instances of downloads, and people are actually putting them to good use right now. So that's one example I wanted to cite. And very quickly, taking another 60 seconds, Anup, I want to talk about another different use case, which probably may be applicable for an organization that could have a slightly greater degree of adoption of Industry 4.0. If you can take me to the next chart, right? And as the chart changes, what I'm talking about is a use case. This actually occurred to me when I was talking to a customer. They are in the midst of executing a greenfield expansion. A few of their machines could not be delivered, and because the equipment suppliers are in Western Europe, the machines are yet to actually scale, right? So their planned, go live schedules, of course, have been disturbed, but they are going to take an even longer time period because they don't really know what the scaling time would be for the equipment to arrive, etc., etc. Anyhow, concepts to be considered over here is what we call as virtual commissioning, right? We all have been exposed to this idea of digital twins, right? But there are a lot of hidden gems within the whole concept of a digital twin applied to manufacturing. One I'm laying out in front of you is what is known as, a virtual commissioning, which allows you to simulate a piece of equipment whose digital twin is being used to integrate with a line at a factory or a plant. The equipment may not be there at all, and you literally have the entire commissioning carried out as if the equipment is already there. What do you save out of it? Well, when the equipment arrives, there's actually just a trouble-free startup, and that saves you at a minimum several days, and in some instances, maybe a few weeks to several weeks, depending upon the complexity of the equipment, right? It can also be utilized. The same technology can, of course, be utilized for training the operator on using those equipments, which is a perfect use of the COVID-induced downtime. And the examples can go on and on. So, Anup, these were two examples that I wanted to lay out where technology is coming to the rescue, and bridging the gap as we think about restarting our plants in the brownfield setting. And I gave you the example of a greenfield as well. Back to you, Anup.
Thanks, Dilip. And I think we will take an immediate feedback from the audience as to where they are with respect to some of the technologies you've spoken about. There is definitely a kind of a indirect reference to Industry 4.0, which you might have alluded to. So let's get straight with the next poll. This looks pretty easy, I guess. People are voting in fast. We've crossed the 100 mark, so that's pretty good going. Another minute, I think we should be done.
Anup, I think the audience is quick. They don't need another minute.
Yeah, we'll close it faster.
Yeah.
Dr. Jha, maybe we can close the poll in 10 seconds and then show the results. I didn't give a third choice. Maybe there are people in the audience who are somewhere in the middle, but that's okay. Those of you who didn't answer it because you had a question in mind, please feel free to send in your question or concern. Let's close the poll now. And okay, that's done. So almost a split vote. Doesn't seem to be a very clear answer because people's definitions of Industry 4.0 might also be varying. And that's a topic which we will take a little later with Dr. Jha and some of it in the second round. Great. So now that we've got through a lot of technology stuff, let's again take a pause and go through something very, very fundamental. Let's talk a little bit about the economy of which we all part of, and let's see where we are headed. So you know that we went through a economic slowdown over the last couple of years for various reasons, and now the pandemic has not only battered us but the entire global economy. I had introduced Mr. Nandakumar earlier as an entrepreneur starting in mid-70s and still very much in the driver's seat, facing all odds, serving society through various industry bodies. And he's been studying a lot of economic trends. He's also been advising the government on measures to stimulate small and medium enterprise. What is going to be the cascading impact on India in view of this whole shakeout globally, and specifically on our Prime Minister's goal to attain $5 trillion economy by the year 2024?
Thank you, Anup.
Mr. Nandakumar? Yeah.
Thank you, Anup. And good afternoon to all of you who is attending the seminar. As Anup has said, this pandemic has really battered. It's not only global economy, in Indian economy as well. Now, when this pandemic has got its own challenge came because nobody has expected. And the global economy is also going through different phases of criticality. So the first impression which all around the global economies have come out is, as late as last week, is the impact so far on the global economy is around $9 trillion US. And by the time this pandemic gets over, which some people say it might be end of the year. It is by theoretical getting over, but practical getting over will take some more time. So by theoretical getting over, it could be much higher, maybe around $15 trillion in the impact on economy. If that is the impact on global economy, with India right now at around $2 trillion, what is our situation for the coming year? There has been a lot of deliberations within the government, within the society, within industry associations. There has been various opinions, but narrowed down to three, I won't say ideal situation and expected situations. It could be scenario 1.5% for India, the GDP. Or realistically, it could be around 0.6% of what it was. Or it can even also downward, it can go up to minus 0.9%. If that is the growth level which we have, 2021, is it possible to achieve by 2024 this 5 trillion US dollar? Now, I would say that I won't look at that $5 trillion is the matter. We have to really look at it's an inclusive and sustainable growth. When you say inclusive and sustainable growth, it is immaterial whether we achieve by 2024 $5 trillion or 2023 or it goes to 2028. But sustainable growth involves three P's: people, planet, of course the environment, and of course the profit economy. So the three P's, people, planet, and profit, is part of the process of achieving either the $3 trillion or the inclusive and sustainable growth. Now, when we look at that inclusive and sustainable growth of either the 5 trillion or the by 2025 or 2030, what is the situation at which we are today now? Data which is given out yesterday says the green zone out of the 736 districts today is around 309. But if you really look at the 309 green districts, the population is 26.2, which is contributing there only. And the GDP is only 19.4. The worst on the economic portion is that population or that green districts only contributes 5.9% of the credits which industries take from either the NBFCs or banks or from any other financial institutions. And the deposits are 9.8% only. Given that shrinkage to that level from what it is today, it is very, very difficult to imagine that whether we can have that $5 trillion in 2024 or 2028. Given the subject of today's discussion, the automation and industry 4.0, it might be possible to get into, if not 2024, maybe 3 or 4 years later. But the problem is coming, the inclusive and sustainable growth. In a country like India, where 65% of the population is between the age of 25 to 65, the employment looking people. Is it possible to get into that slot within that time frame? That is the biggest challenge. And on top of it, if we are able to get into that, whether we can achieve the expected $5 trillion. By automation, if we can achieve that $5 trillion earlier, it might be possible that we can get our expected population's expectations to get employed or employable. It is possible. And that comes out because of the skilling. So which means this population of 25 to 35%, 25 to 65%, which is coming within the employable age, you need to do skilling and reskilling. As previous speakers spoke about the digitization, India's biggest challenge is to get our people reskilled into that slot. So unless we simultaneously take up the reskilling into digitization, the workforce, if not the older generation, at least the middle generation, we can't achieve that growth pattern. I'm sure that the government is putting a lot of efforts in skilling. In fact, there is a skilling ministry only and putting a lot of efforts on skilling on digital sector across the industry sector. I'm sure that will certainly help us to get into But the coming generation, where the curriculum is to suit that digital skilling, need to change. Whereas education today in different states, not in concurrent list, and you have a different challenges coming in to get into accepted across the sector digital as part of the curriculum. That's biggest challenge we need to accomplish. So we need to look at skilling. We need to look at our curriculums. We need to look at our employment, that means training factors coming in across the sector. And on top of it, look at the industry factors. Up to the manufacturing sector, nearly 45% comes out of the MSME, micro, small and medium sector. And MSME's sustainability certainly comes on. First is, of course, the finance. And out of the MSME of around 63 million MSMEs, nearly 94% of the MSMEs are micros, either one-man army or if not one man, with a few people. For them, finance might be one of the critical issues, but their biggest challenge is to get into digital knowledge or what their ancillary, what their main sector industry looking for. They may not have, or they will take time to get into that slot. So we need to give it time to get into that slot for them to generate that business. The remaining 6% takes care of the small. Out of that small, again, lower end of the small goes to micro, and the higher end of the small adjusts to medium. So the growth pattern should come from the 6% of the 63 million, which is small and medium sector. And that's their biggest challenge. And when it goes into that for the growth pattern, one of the drawback for us, for India is, though our position in ease of doing business, which is improved from 144 over a period of 5 years to 66, we are still 180 plus in the global ranking on enforcement of contracts. And that is the biggest challenge for MSMEs, especially the medium and larger end of the small, to sustain. Unless the enforcement of contracts across the spectrum is brought up to the global level, we will have that challenge to achieve the required level of growth, which we are foreseeing $5 trillion US. So we have a very, very big challenge over the coming years across industry sectors, across knowledge base, and on top of it, the biggest challenge of the finance, whether MSMEs will have that funds, especially given the challenge over the last 3 years. And last year we had our general election where we had also a slower growth. Given those conditions, whether we will have that in the coming 5 years or 6 years to bring up our growth pattern to that level. This is my biggest concern. But I am sure, if not by 2024, at least by 2026, 2027, we should be able to achieve around $4 trillion US. By 2030, we should be able to do $5 trillion, and with an inclusive and sustainable growth. Over to Anup.
Thank you, Mr. Nandakumar. Now we would like to do a health check on the companies. So I'd request Dr. Jha to launch the poll on the impact our audience is seeing on their company turnover and profitability, because that's also something very, very important. And our entire webinar series is designed to mitigate their hardship to the extent we can contribute. So let's see what the audience has to predict on their company turnover and profitability. Like all of us, we do not know how long the COVID regulations are going to last. So each one of you would probably be factoring your own estimate, which is fine. But this is just to get a sense of where things stand on your financial health. Let's show the results. So the impact is pretty significant. Really, a clear majority is going into the minus 10% to more than minus 25%. Really, really significant. And a cause of concern not only for the manufacturer, but all the people who support manufacturing, including the automation community. We have to figure ways in which to get something back on track very, very quickly. Fine. So now that we've taken a little look at our pocket, taken a look at our economy, let's move back to technology. I'm going to ask Dr. Jha to come and present to us what really can be done as a strategy, as a technology strategy to improve ourselves and the collaborative winning strategy for Make in India post-COVID. I would like to call that really as Make in India 4.0. Dr. Jha, you are spearheading this future-oriented project on smart manufacturing. We spoke a little about it. Can you share how you are collaborating with industry and who all can benefit from our audience?
Yeah, good evening all. Let me take up this discussion further. The good thing that I realized today is that what we were doing and planning from last 5-6 years is basically the time has come where we have to apply now. Good thing is that solutions people are working earlier and the problem comes now. So we are almost ready to take up this challenge whenever it comes to implement in the manufacturing. Let me just take you to the journey that we have started 1.5 years back. This is the initiative that we started at IIT Delhi with Automation Industry Association, where we come together to build this foundation for smart manufacturing. So idea was to demystify and start working on the technologies which we all realize that we require today. In fact, that's what I'm saying, that the solution we started working 2 years back, now it's the time to implement some of those solutions. Let me just give you a quick glimpse of kind of activities we are doing and kind of a facility that we build up so that everybody can be benefited out of this initiative. So this foundation, we call it in a common engineering and learning facility, where we have created a small infrastructure where we will be experimenting a lot on these technologies. In fact, if you see that when I share some of the examples, we spend a lot of time in experimenting with all these technologies, and now we are ready to take this to the shop floor wherever it is required right now. So we created a small factory which we call an assembly line. It's a cyber physical assembly line. Idea is to deploy those technologies which will allow us to experiment with the Industry 4 or smart manufacturing. I just take you to the slide back. I just put intentionally some of the areas gray, but this is what we keep talking about, the smart manufacturing stages. And today, as we are talking about the restart, now we realize that the importance of the stages first, second, and third. Because when we talk about operating remotely, I think most important part is the visibility. Because if I'm not in the shop floor in the factory, I'm more concerned what is happening on the shop floor. So this is a very important aspect, and certainly the connectivity is the most important. As you have responded well in the poll also, we all look forward toward the connectivity with the machines. So let me share the kind of technologies we worked and the kind of technologies we require. This is something is foremost, and I think the most important thing we want today. It's a remote visibility and the insight on the operations and the machines and the plant, what is happening inside. So I am just sharing, these are the very minimal things we need to adopt or we need to implement today. Because when you're talking about coming out of this situation, this is something immediately required to be deployed as soon as the lockdown open up. Those who have done and well prepared, I think that's it's a way to go ahead. So what we want today is the kind of a real dashboard of the machines, the equipments on the shop floor. So even if I'm not visiting frequently, and then I just keep track of what is happening in the plant and how much production went on. So we need to have all the equipments, all the operations on a real-time dashboard. So this is what we have created for our new facility in this foundation. Then apart from that, the issue comes when there is something is not working as expected. So we need to have the solutions, the technologies which will enable us to do a kind of a remote maintenance or the remote assistance to the people. Some of the panelists has spoken earlier on this topic. So this is just one example where we would like to understand what's the problem with the machine. So if I have a remote access to the machine, HMI is the immediate thing, because as you are standing in front of a machine looking at the different parameters, how they are changing. So this remote access to machine HMI will give you, enable you to look at the different variables, and then accordingly you will be able to diagnose the problem in the machines. Same time, once you come to know there are certain things to be rectified or certain activity to be done at the development side, we need to have an access to the remote development system as well. So because as the system is operating, if you want to change some variable parameters and the values of those parameters, you need to have a remote access to that also. In the discussion, it comes up that we are talking about the assistance at the shop floor, because as has been mentioned earlier, not all experts will be available now onward immediately on the shop floor to help people. Even the maintenance people will be in a control number on the shop floor. So in these kind of technologies which Mr. Sawhney has touched upon and Mr. Sivaram has mentioned about, we need to have technologies. This is one example of a V4 chalk where you can assist a person on the shop floor to do the maintenance activity. So expert need not to go to the shop floor. Still he is able to get a real-time view of the equipments and the machines and able to guide the person to do the maintenance. We need to work more on the development of these technologies. And so what examples I'm sharing, these are some of the developments we have already done in our foundation for smart manufacturing, and most of them are ready to deploy in a larger shop floor also. This is one of the example how the augmented reality use case can be built for the maintenance. So it's not just an AR. AR comes the last. We need to build up all the technology pieces before we jump into the AR, because we want the system should be able to find out the fault, and then through the IoT data we will be able to realize what type of fault it is, and then finally at the last stage we will be assisting a person using the AR to rectify the fault. You also need more smart machine interfaces, because as you see the kind of a scenario, we are not supposed to touch machine very frequently. So we need to even have those kind of interactions. So these are some of the things we started a year back, and today we found that they are very much required with the machines. So when we are thinking about smart machines, these machine interfaces are foremost required. Then we will also be looking forward to build up these kind of systems, because expert maintenance system is one which will assist people on the floor. Every time we may not be having so many experts available at the remote. We would like to build up, so the kind of technologies that I have mentioned on the right hand side, you can see that how we will put all the technologies in place to build such kind of a system. So the first thing that we want is to have a digital representation of the data. Then we need to do a system behavior analysis. I was reading the Q&A, people were asking how the machine learning will help in that case. So it plays a very important, so all your cyber physical system understanding, your digital twins, your machine learning concept will help in building such kind of a system. And we already started working and building some of the system for demonstration in our foundation. And the later, once the system found some fault, you will be using it for the remote access, the AR part. We also would like to take some of these learning to the people, and that's the idea that we have already started working, and we are planning now to launch our cyber physical training systems. So idea is that, as you all know, that last 40 days, everybody is now throwing the free resources to experiment upon, learn some new technologies. This is another environment we are creating at the foundation where you will be allowed to learn and experiment on the real hardware. Even though you are not in the facility, you can remotely do learning and experiment on the real hardware. So this is some of the unique things that we are building. So we are trying to build up the AR part. So even if you are not able to see face to face the equipment on which you are learning, you can at least create that augmented view or the virtual view through your mobile app, and you can see if you change some parameters how the system is behaving. So this is another system we are building, and slowly, I think in a small time we will be launching this also, so that those who are really interested in doing more experiment with the smart manufacturing and automation, they will be able to do the live experiments on these training kits. This is another example how this can work. You can even see that how the different exercises can be done, how you will experience the activity going on to the real system. So our intent is to train people on the real hardware, even they are not physically in the facility. So remotely also they can also go through that kind of a learning. So I think that is what from my side. I will just ask Anup to take it further. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Jha. I think, a lot of questions had come in from the audience, which I was tracking, and several of them you have already touched upon. So that's really quite a pleasant coincidence that there has been a very fast reading of the audience mind and some perspective has been given. Thank you so much, Dr. Jha. I'm now going to look at some of the questions and direct it to our speakers. Mr. Paranjape, picking up from your initial opening comments, and you showed us the conventional arrangement as well as the arrangement for social distancing. You also spoke about machine decontamination. First, give us an idea of what is really the holistic plan needed to ensure long-lasting of the business.
Okay, thanks, Anup. In fact, some of our colleagues have briefly touched upon this holistic approach. It has also come out of the poll that close to 55% of the participants have not gone for Industry 4.0, or they are to a lesser extent into Industry 4.0. And 75% of the participants have been, if I may say, significantly impacted by COVID-19. Now, although I don't have the data about this 25%, but I presume that these 25% must be having some degree of Industry 4.0 implementation. Now, why I am talking about Industry 4.0? In fact, COVID-19 is showing very clearly that Industry 4.0 is even more relevant today. I will take only a simple example of touch-free. And when you are having digitalization, there are several areas where you are going to reduce paper flow, and if the paper flow is reduced naturally, the touch is avoided. This is one of the simplest examples that I can think of, but suffice it to say that if you have an integrated approach, like in the past, people used to have a totally integrated automation approach, same way, if you have an integrated approach for implementation of Industry 4.0, rather than a piecemeal approach, the implementation can be done in silos depending on the priorities, depending on the necessities. But you should have a total blueprint available to you. I would say the spin-off benefit of the COVID-19 shutdown is that people are having time to look at these aspects and put people or resources on preparation of this particular blueprint.
Mr.
This
Paranjape, allow me to jump in and ask you another question so that you can integrate that. There's a very
Yeah.
interesting question come about, mm, the touch-free operation, and the question is from Mr. Naresh Kantur, who's talking about decontamination of power tools and operator interfaces, as
I saw
most
that.
of them,
I saw
yeah,
that
they're
question.
not IQ 65 compliant. So, would you like to, integrate your response, including this question as well?
I will definitely touch upon that. So that is again coming back to my statement of an integrated approach. You should have this blueprint of Industry 4.0 starting from shop floor right up to your boardroom available with you, and then chalk out a plan of implementation. Preparing a plan does not mean you have to invest right up front. In fact, currently under the money constraint, you will have to focus on the essentials. I will now take this particular question about power tools. There are also decontamination devices available which are working on the. They are available depending on the shape and size of the devices. I'm sure the manufacturers of these ultraviolet decontamination devices will be in a position to give the solution. The important part is that wherever there is a touch, that area needs to get decontaminated. And therefore, all the exposed areas, if they are subjected to ultraviolet radiation, we will be in a position to achieve the result. I will not enter into the details about the integrated approach of Industry 4.0. Everybody knows that from shop floor, we have come right up to product lifecycle management. You have to go beyond product lifecycle management right up to the enterprise software and see that you have this integrated approach, because that will help in upgradation, that will help in seamless implementation. There are several advantages. So this is what I would say, and I would leave at that. If there are any more questions, Anup, I'll be willing to take them.
Okay, no, thanks, Mr. Paranjape. I know this topic itself, single-handedly, we should be doing a dedicated seminar. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at one more question, and then we'll have some polls. Polls is always interesting. Let's move into technology domain itself. A lot of people actually spoke about Industry 4.0. One half said Industry 4.0 they've already done. Another half said no. So I'm going to introduce another poll. Dr. Jha, can you take number 6 poll right now?
Looks like this time there are more undecided. Looks like this time there are more undecided.
Yeah, so this is a little intriguing. I guess it requires a little more investigation. Dr. Jha, can you close this, because I'd like to move back to questions. So please announce this and I'll take on the next question. So we have questions which I would request we'll be taking it offline because they're very, very specific. So there's a question on Vuforia implementation. We could take it later. We can have a question on specific RFID solution for a chemical plant. In terms of general questions, yeah, this one is pretty interesting. The question is from Vishal Vashisht. How should we proceed for automation like robot or AI or a smart machine, because implementation of these requires high capital costs? This is an open question. Anybody from our panel could address that.
This is Ravi Agarwal here. Just to break the ice, yes, it remains to be capital intensive. Last 10 days actually have shown us a lot of way by virtue of experience. To quote an example, material movement within the plant, I'll come back to the favorite topic, is a key issue, because in social distancing, see, one thing is keeping the operator assigned to the machine and separations, but how does one move material back and forth from the machines, to the lines, to the pallets, etc., etc.? One interesting aspect came, and that's what I would like to quote. Using AGVs, our favorite topic these days, automated guided vehicles with specific payload capacities depending on the application is very, very keenly followed idea. And here, the issue is, does somebody need to design it, how to operate it, how to deploy it? Some key models have come up wherein a lot of AGV manufacturers we have come across are willing to, and this is the Industry 4.0 aspect as well coming along, remote maintainability, operation, number of hours it has clocked, is offering product as a service. That means instead of a huge capital deployment, some of these capital intensive hardware are also offered as services by some service providers. So that's one of the ways out in terms of addressing the capital intensity of the immediate requirement. Over to you, Anupji.
Fine. So let's now also finish off our polling with the audience. Dr. Jha, there is one poll which is still left, and I think that's going to give a pretty interesting feedback. Some questions are also getting linked to that. Please launch. So this really is our question from industry, the most critical question. What have you been doing in the last several weeks? I'm sure the management and senior management has been having strategies on the financial side, on the health side, but on the technical side, what really have the people been doing? This will give us a good feedback. I think we have a trend. So let's close this, and I'm going to link the next question to the trend which has come. Almost 80% or more than 80% are actually looking at it seriously. Only 11% believe that they are managing it very well. So people are talking about critical skill sets. They are talking about a variety of offerings. Some are looking at advice on how to go about selecting. So let me connect this question and ask you, Dr. Jha. We have a question from Mr. Chandra Mauli. I guess he's our expert from Bangalore. Yes. The question is how to prioritize the ranking of Industry 4.0 tools to recover the business, which is the one first to go and second and so on, looking at cost versus value. And Mr. Sawhney, if you'd like to maybe take a shot at it, maybe you could also jump in.
Yeah, so as I was mentioning and explaining this different stages which we keep on discussing earlier, so the current scenario, look forward that at least we should reach up to level 3 in this stages, which means that initially we have to start with the connectivity so that we have machines connected. And the most important part is that I should have a remote visibility on the operations, what is going on. So I think if we try to prioritize, we will be starting bottom up. So we certainly look forward for the connectivity, and the visibility is the foremost requirement to start with. I may request Mr. Sawhney to further take it up.
Let's hear him as well.
Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Jha. I would like to just build up on what you just stated, Dr. Jha. I think when it comes to concepts or ideas like digital transformation, we must not lose sight of the outcome that we are trying to drive. So technology is great. Technology is no longer a limiting factor, as we witnessed in the last few weeks, right? But we have to be very clear about the outcome that you want to drive by the use of technology. So I would submit to you that you should have, complete clarity on what is it that you are trying to achieve. It's like what Mr. Paranjape, a few minutes ago spoke about, which is having a broader view of what you want to drive, and then you can implement in smaller chunks by looking at the ease to implement versus the cost required, and that could be one way to achieve. So, I'll like to give a simple example. All of us are using smartphones. All of our smartphones are loaded with applications. But, if you really look at it, the ones that you end up using need not necessarily be the most popular apps. It's what you use your smartphones for, right? Some common ones could be like the WhatsApp, the world, but, it's life is about 80-20. You must be very, very clear on which are those 20% things that have an 80% impact on the problems that you're trying to solve. So this is just an add-on to what Dr. Jha just stated, right? Don't look at it by the sheer investment that will go in terms of setting it up. Just look at it from the outcome or the value that you can unlock with it. So, Anup, that was another perspective.
Fine. So we've spoken, I think, enough about technology, and we are just 10 minutes away from closure. So there is one thing which really all of us really should be concerned about, and that is how are we going to leverage ourselves as a nation to regain, bounce back, and take the pride of place as far as productivity is concerned. And the role of people is very important. So I'm going to ask Mr. Sivaram if you can summarize this whole trend for automation and Industry 4.0. What is the challenge? What kind of people are really going to be required in the digital economy? Is it easy, or does it call for a big mindset? Because I don't see too many people, who are thinking and acting based on connected data. All of us have very bright minds, but I have several friends with bright minds who rather let somebody else interpret data for them. Your take on that very briefly, and then we move to another very important
Anup, that's
aspect.
a very interesting question, but the challenge is when you say very briefly, because these days I am myself a kind of an evangelist for the digital transformation. But to come back to the question, you see, this digital transformation, it is about digital, yes, correct, and digital enters at every step, but actually it is about transformation. And this transformation is about organizations. What does it mean to transform an organization? It is to change the way we internally work. Transforming the organization doesn't mean that they will keep on producing the same stuff. They'll serve their customers in the same with the same offerings, but the way they organize themselves internally will be different. And how is it going to be different? It is going to be different by how the people will interact with each other. How they will interact with each other within the organization, within the entire supply chain, within the entire value chain. All interactions and all decisions must be data driven, and this is the first and foremost mindset change that has to happen, because we are used to creating decisions, taking decisions by every now and then going into a huddle, talking it out among a particular group of people, a chosen group of people, a select group of people, and deriving future actions out of that. Actually, what we should be doing is how these machines work, that we collect the data directly from the source, we run it through an algorithm, and the algorithm props up possible courses of action, and then we apply our human mind on the top of that, on the data-based decision assistance, to derive our action plans. This is the, I think, most fundamental way that we need to change ourselves, because this is somewhere halfway between a complete artificial intelligence, if you so call it, right? But artificial intelligence has certain drawbacks because it does not have a humanness. As humans, we are superior because we are sometimes unpredictable, sometimes emotional, and these human emotions of honesty and of kindness and so on, they are also important in business dealings. And therefore, this via media is the best way to move forward. And I think this is the way that actually India should go forward, that we should look for data all the time greedily. We should look for formulations, how to derive decisions out of this data, and over and above that, apply our humanness to take future decisions. I think in brief, that is the way I would like to answer that question.
Really, thank you, Mr. Shiv Kumar. We are now almost closing. There's one very, very important aspect not yet discussed. You know, COVID has taught us one lesson, that we are all one. All humanity is one, and more than all humanity, all of planet is one. And perhaps COVID is a grim reminder to us having forgotten that vital lesson. Especially for manufacturing, we have been hearing about so many compliances since very early days. We knew about the pollution control board, and all the companies would do was to bypass whatever they could. Mr. Nandakumar, I'm going to ask you this last question for today's panel discussion. What is going to be the government stand on ensuring compliances, not only COVID related, but all the other ones which predated COVID? Are they going to be more stricter, and what should manufacturers be ready with? Very, very quick answer.
Thank you, Anup. As I said earlier, the compliances, especially on the pollution control, pollution monitoring, is very, very critical. Government has been much more aggressive on this for the last 3-4 years. In fact, most of the state pollution controls, central pollution control boards give notice to primarily on the continuous process industries. If the data on the emission or the air quality are not received at their website within every minute. So it's very closely monitored. So compliance related to pollution, compliance related to emission is one of the critical areas government is looking at, especially for continuous process industries. And at the same time, they are also looking at how can the industries bring down the pollution. One is, of course, is the continuous process industry. They can employ waste heat recoveries and also the space conditioning, by which they can reduce the cost of fossil fuel energy and bring down the carbon footprint. So there are a lot of low carbon technology areas which now continuous process industries is looking at employ, and which also gives clearly the opportunity for Industry 4.0. It is not necessarily on the continuous process industries. We can also look at our agricultural side. Most of the agricultural lands are still irrigated by the irrigation systems, where we are using normal pumps. By utilizing an intelligent sensor, we can make the pump digital, which will give us energy efficiency as well as better control on the water. So water is going to be another critical area. So in my opinion, combined with the compliance, Industry 4.0 offers quite a good potential for continuous process industries as well as agriculture. And also one area is the supply chain. Our logistics are very poorly controlled because our cold chain is still not yet in operational to the required level. In fact, one study says out of the 400 million tons of perishable goods we produce, we are able to utilize only 15%. The remaining 85% is wasted at the producing centers because our supply chain, our logistics are very poor. Our cold rooms are not properly equipped. So if we are able to put in all these conditions, and that also gives a potential for Industry 4.0, we must bring up this subject that compliance is not just enforced law, but compliance is also productivity as well as return on investment much faster. Thank you, Anup. Over to Anup.
Thank you, Mr. Nandakumar. So with that, we now come to the end of today's session. The good news is that this is going to be the launch of many more webinars. We have already decided dates for the next two. So I request the audience to make a note, mark their calendars. Of course, you're going to get an email. And this time we would perhaps make it a little more focused on specific concerns which have been raised. The topic is huge. We're going to have many more seminars, as I said, but since we need to make some specific announcements, here are two dates. Please make a note. A big thank you to the audience for whom we have all gathered today. It's because of you that we have been able to bring such a wonderful team. The team will be available also on the 8th of May. And of course, slowly we will introduce to you more technical speakers as we go along. A big thank you to my panelists, Dr. Sunil Jha, Mr. Vijay Paranjape, Mr. P.V. Sivaram, Mr. Ravi Agarwal, Mr. Nandakumar. It's been really a pleasure to having you back on this momentous occasion. I think it is an occasion for all of India to get together, and AIA already has received lots of messages from other associations where we will be doing some specific programs for their members. However, the current series is more generic and it is supposed to be for the entire manufacturing industry, irrespective of verticals. So with that, once again, I'm going to offer my thanks to everybody. Thank you and Jai Hind.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anupji. Thank you, audience.